housekeeping notes, and then I'll open the webinar. Housekeeping notes: if the moderator opens the floor, and if you wish to take the floor, please click the raise hand icon that appears next to your name on the participant panel. The moderator would then call the names, and if you're named, you can unmute yourself and speak. And when your speaking time is over, please do re-mute yourself and click the lower hand icon. You're also free to type questions in the chat box and send those to everyone in the chat. And if you need technical assistance, please put your message in the chat and send it to either everyone or the host or co-host. Kindly note that we are now recording this session and it is broadcast live on YouTube. So by remaining on the webinar, you have provided your consent to being recorded. And please do help us keep improving the experience by filling out the survey at the end of this webinar. So welcome to all of you. Good day and good evening. My name is Marianne Bailey. I'm the Senior Coordination Officer at the Secretariat of the Minamata Convention on Mercury. And we're very pleased that the fourth round of applications to the specific international program has launched, and we're pleased to welcome you to this webinar. So to start out with, the specific international program forms part of the financial mechanism of the Minamata Convention on Mercury that is set forth in Article 13 of the convention. It's set up to assist developing country parties and parties with economies in transition to implement projects aimed at strengthening their capacity to implement their obligations under the convention. The terms of reference of the program were established at the first conference of the parties, and they were finalized at COP2. And the rules of procedure of our governing board were established at the board's third meeting. So in the first round of applications to the SIP, the board approved 5 projects for a total funding of about $1 million. That was back in 2018 when the first round launched. In the second round, which was in 2019, the board approved 10 projects for a total funding of approximately $2 million. And in the third round, which took place over the course of 2020 and 2021, the board approved 9 projects for a total funding of approximately $2.2 million. So the current round, the fourth round, just launched on Wednesday, the 24th of April, and it's made possible with the generous donor contributions to the specific trust fund from Austria, Denmark, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, and the United States. The Minamata Convention Secretariat is hosting this webinar to support eligible parties in developing their project proposals. And there are 4 additional webinars in different languages and time zones. The languages also available are French and English. And as I said, they are recorded and available on our YouTube channel, and they will be available also on our website, along with the presentations. So we look forward to hearing your questions and discussing the important considerations when developing and submitting project applications. At the end of this webinar, we'll hold a Q&A session, and you can ask your questions verbally at that time or in the chat function on the right side of your screen, but feel free also to write your questions in the chat box during the presentation at any time. So again, welcome to this webinar. In this session, we'll cover the timeline of the application process. We will provide suggestions on how to identify and prioritize national issues of concern. We will explain how projects can be elaborated using the application guidelines, and we'll provide tips for finalizing the project application and ensuring that it's complete. And as I said, then we'll open the floor for questions and discussions. So now I'd like to introduce my colleague Maria Irene Rizzo, Associate Officer at the Secretariat, and she will discuss the timeline.
Thank you very much, Marian, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the participants today, also from my side. Let's move on to the timeline for the fourth round of applications. As Marian said, the fourth round of applications has just been launched. It was launched in April 2024. So this slide wants to give you an overview of the timeline for this process for the fourth round of applications, but we will show you the various steps in more details in the next few slides. So I will request my colleague Shariful to move to the next slide. So as I said, the round of applications opened on Wednesday, 24th of April, 2024, and the deadline for submitting the applications is on 31st of July, 2024. It is also a Wednesday. And the applications that will be submitted after this deadline of 31st of July will not be considered. So please be mindful that this is a hard deadline. Then in August and September 2024 of this year, the Secretariat will be very busy screening and reviewing all the applications that will be submitted by the deadline. And we have planned this initial feedback phase that is meant for the Secretariat to provide the comments and some suggested technical revisions to all the applicants in order to help them clarify and correct the items in the application and ensure that the application that is submitted is technically sound. These revisions will be done on the logical framework, and we will speak more about that later, and on the project budget, but also on other parts of the application as needed. So after this phase of screening and technical review from the Secretariat, we will send you all the comments and suggestions for technical revisions by Monday, 30th of September 2024. So please expect to receive our comments by that deadline. And you have, starting from that day, you have a very tight window of 1 month until 31st of October 2024 to provide the updates and resubmit your application considering the comments provided by the Secretariat. So this step has been planned into the process for the fourth round of applications to ensure that the applications that go before the governing board in January, later in the process, are as good as possible. And if the governing board approves the project for funding, it would require very little or no revisions after approval. So we are not saying, of course, that the initial submission should be a rough draft. It should be very much a complete application, and it should follow very closely the application guidelines. We will speak more about that and provide you more indications and instructions to prepare your project proposal later during this presentation. And of course, be mindful that the Secretariat will not be able to rewrite the applications for you. And the amount of time that you will have for revisions will be only 1 month, so it will be very limited. So it's very important that all the work in drafting and preparing your presentation is done now before the deadline of 31st of July. Moving on to the next slide, we will show you the last part of this timeline of the process of the fourth round. Of course, as we said, after the applications are resubmitted by 31st of October, the Secretariat will prepare the project appraisals for the SIP Governing Board, who will meet in January to consider the applications and approve the projects for funding. And the last step shown here is the notification. This will happen in February 2025, tentatively. And it means that the Secretariat will notify the outcomes of the governing board meeting to all the applicants that have submitted applications. And for the successful applicants, for those projects that will be approved by the governing board for funding, this is when the intensive work starts, because if there are additional comments by the governing board on the applications, these will have to be considered and the application resubmitted. And then the project applicants will be requested to work with the Secretariat to finalize a legal agreement for the project. And after the legal agreement is signed, we will start the process to disburse installments of funding to implement the project. And also at this stage, you will be requested to communicate the final names of the project focal point and the project correspondence focal points, who will be our points of contact with the applicant. But all of this is beyond the scope of this training, so we will not be focusing on this stage. We will be focusing on preparing your applications. And with that, let's move on, and I turn again to Marian for the next part of the presentation.
Thank you, Irene. We'll now move on to the next part of the presentation on identifying and prioritizing your national issues of concern, but we'll first discuss the fundamentals of the SIP. So how much funding is available? The SIP can provide support from US dollars 50,000 to 250,000 per project proposal. This amount is inclusive of the budget needed for monitoring, evaluation, and final financial audits. And we'll talk about those details later in this presentation. But that's the funding window, $50,000 to $250,000. And who can apply? Only eligible governments can apply to the specific international program. So to be eligible, a government must be a party to the convention and must be a developing country or a country with economy in transition. Now, it is possible that some of you are in the process of becoming a party. And so for your application to be accepted, you must have transmitted the ratification documents to the UN Treaty Office by the time the application window ends. So therefore, by 31st of July of this year, the ratification documents would have had to have been transmitted to the UN Treaty Office. The specific international program takes full account of the specific needs and special circumstances of parties that are small island developing states and least developed countries, as stated in Article 13. And I'd like to explain that governments here refer to the national government ministry or department in charge of implementing the obligations of that country under the Minamata Convention. So affiliations of governments or local governments are not eligible, but they can be partners with the national government entity. So note that the application form differentiates between the applicant government, which refers to the government submitting the application, and the applicant government official, who is the lead contact person on behalf of that applicant government. And we need to see both of those in the application. Moving on, the SIP doesn't only fund individual country projects. Several governments can jointly submit a sub-regional or regional or even multi-country project. In this case, one government would be specified as the lead for the project. And this, in some cases, is a good approach for implementation issues which are best addressed in a sub-regional or inter-regional coordinated manner. The amount of funding remains the same in that case, so up to $250,000. We have a couple of excellent examples of regional projects, and we'd be happy to give you more details on those should you be interested. Now, the duration of the project. Projects must be completed within 36 months or 3 years. We highly recommend that all the technical activities under the project be completed about 3 months before the end of the project period, so that you can do your final project reporting and auditing, and that all that can be completed within the time frame of the project. There is a slight window in our standard legal agreements that allow final reports, both expenditure and narrative reports, to be submitted after that project period, but that is a very, very small window. So we really recommend that all of that be wrapped up within the 36 months. Now, criteria for project appraisals. These projects are based on a set of, they're appraised based on a set of criteria that was elaborated by the SIP governing board and has been used so far in all 3 rounds of applications. First, the eligibility criteria. In addition to the government being a developing country party or a party with an economy in transition, the project must not duplicate efforts already funded by the Global Environment Facility or by the Special Program on Institutional Strengthening in the Chemicals and Waste Arena. So in addition to the eligibility criteria, we also have criteria for coherence appraisal and prioritization appraisal. And we're going to touch on some of these in a bit more detail later on during this presentation, but they are fully set out in the application guidelines. So if you access the application guidelines, and the link is here in this slide, but hopefully you can find it easily on our website for the 4th round of applications. And if not, please reach out to us. We're happy to direct you to the application guidelines and the forms and anything else you need to get underway with your application. Now, since you have already joined us for this webinar, in the next slide, we can see sort of the architecture of the Minamata Convention, and we know that you're already quite familiar with this, so we will not discuss the provisions of the Minamata Convention in detail today. But with this slide, we really just want to illustrate that your application must reflect the ways in which you will seek to improve your ability to implement one or more of the binding obligations under the convention. So this really is your starting point for designing your proposal, the way you think about the obligations to which you're committed to implementing under the convention, and where your specific needs are in relation to those obligations. So you first want to think about the particular change that you seek to make by undertaking the project, and the problem that you seek to address through your project. And then you may have the results from your Minamata initial assessment, for example, or the results from, not results, but the information provided in your national report to the convention. There have now been full national reports and 2 short reports that our parties have submitted under the convention. And parties are invited to elaborate their needs under the national reporting, but also the national reporting sometimes clarifies certain problem areas or specific implementation challenges that parties are facing. And those are a good starting point for thinking about your application. So these, the MIAs, the reporting, and together with any other similar efforts or previous projects, should provide you with a good idea about the national issues which require attention and priority project intervention. So it's important to keep in mind the scope of the specific international program when developing your project proposal. Now, in the next slide, I want to give you a glimpse of the design of the financial mechanism of the convention. Of course, it includes the Global Environment Facility alongside the specific international program. So those are the 2 components of our financial mechanism. But we also see that the special program is an important vehicle and an important instrument for our parties to gain support for full implementation of what they need to do under the convention. So the special program on institutional strengthening we see as kind of a very related fund. And now that we have the new Global Framework on Chemicals Fund, which is now in the process of sort of designing its procedures, that will also be an important related fund, which our applicants, as well as our governing board, and we at the Secretariat will look at very closely. Now, moving on to the next slide, because there are these different funds, we have found that sometimes it's a bit challenging for our parties or applicants to other funds to know which fund is the right fund for the particular project idea that they have in mind. So we kind of use this way of thinking about the SIP and the JEF and the special program side by side to illustrate their unique roles. So again, it's very, very important that SIP projects do not duplicate efforts undertaken under the special program or under the JEF. But they can be and should be very complementary to one another. So it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. While all these mechanisms can work to build institutional frameworks, policies, laws, regulations, and management systems, there's significant differences between them, as you can see on this slide. So a SIP project could lay the groundwork for a larger JEF project, for instance, a project that provides the global environmental benefits alongside a larger investment project, say in a particular industrial sector. But a SIP project could also address a different aspect of a larger issue. For example, on ASGM, we've had an example of a project that built capacity among rural health workers to address ASGM-related health risks, while at the same time that particular party had a large JEF Planet Gold project. So these were working very much in coordination with one another, and that was quite attractive to our governing board as a creative approach. But a SIP project could also take the approach of a JEF project and build it out into different sectors, perhaps. So there's many ways of thinking about the complementarity and avoiding the overlap. And then with respect to the special program, that has to address institutional strengthening across more than one instrument. So the Basel, Rotterdam, Stockholm conventions, the strategic approach, and now the global framework on chemicals. These are all things that the special program can support and does support if when an approved project can address those in an integrated way across more than one of these instruments. And also the special program is open to non-parties. A similarity of the SIP and the special program is that we do not use implementing agencies, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment. So I do want to move on at this time to how to develop your problem statement for your project. So when you are identifying the thing you seek to change in your project, it's usually done in the form of a problem statement. And for this, we highly recommend using a theory of change to conceptualize your project and to help with its future planning and implementation. So the theory of change helps with developing and addressing your national issues of concern. It's not required as part of the project application, but it can be included, and it is a really useful way to bring your team or your cross-ministry group or your multi-stakeholder group together to begin designing your project together. So we have this example on the screen. This is the theory of change in its most simple form. They are often much, much more complex than this, and they look at assumptions and drivers and other related factors. But for our purposes, this simple format can be useful. So we start with the impact statement, which is defined as the long-term change to the environment and to living conditions. The impact will not be achieved in full during the project's implementation period. But in this case, the impact statement is protect human health and the environment from anthropogenic emissions and releases of mercury and mercury compounds, therefore reflective of the objective of the Minamata Convention on Mercury. So once you've established the impact statement, you focus on developing a project outcome. A project outcome is the observed change in behavior, knowledge, or skill, or it can also be a change in the attitude or action or condition on the ground. So examples of outcomes include improved knowledge and technical capacity, improved coordination and communication between the stakeholders, or increased awareness. In this example, we've stated the outcome as increased national capacity for developing control strategies for existing and new sources of emissions. This is just an example. But as you can observe, the outcome of this project is closely related to fulfilling one of the obligations of the convention, and it establishes a clear link between the two. So after establishing the outcome, you need to think about the outputs. Those are the tangible goods or services that the project produces or delivers. In this example, we have the outputs as the inventory of relevant sources in Annex D. That's one output. Another is the national plan developed for emission control. And so as you can see, both outputs contribute directly to reaching the outcome of the project. And the last component in this theory of change example are the activities. These are the basic building blocks of the project. You need to think about the detailed activities which are required in order to achieve the output. So here you can see some of the activities listed. Again, these are just examples, but these are the things that would be reflected in the elements of your project application, which we'll talk more about in just a couple of minutes. Now, a very useful resource for you to draw upon when developing your project is the UNEP Global Mercury Partnership. And that brings together about 200 partners from governments, intergovernmental organizations, non-governmental organizations, industry, and academia, with a broad range of expertise on Mercury. So its focus of work is on supporting the implementation of the convention and on providing knowledge and science on Mercury, and on delivering outreach and awareness raising towards global action. So the partnership has a great deal of information, including technical information, resources, and tools available on its website. And the expert partners are often willing to provide direct advice. And you can find the list of partners also on the website. And so we've provided the link to their website on this slide. And we're also happy to facilitate any interaction you wish to have with the partnership. And if you're a government and you have not already become a member of the partnership, it's very simple to do and can be just a valuable way to exchange information and interact with a large community of people who are both expert in, but very eager to implement the objective of the convention. Now, moving on, I'd like to talk briefly about how to address gender aspects of your project. And the application guidelines has more information on this, and we encourage you to look at that carefully. But applications submitted under the SIP need to explain how the design and the implementation and the monitoring and evaluation of the project includes a gender lens. So we know from experience that projects are much more successful and their results are more sustainable if they explicitly address gender. So not only should the project application consider how Mercury risks and management approaches might impact men and women differently, but they should also integrate principles of equal participation and non-discrimination, including in the staffing and management of the projects, also in stakeholder engagement and in public participation. So projects should ensure that they raise awareness among both men and women, ensure opportunities to include the perspectives of both men and women, including in, for example, training opportunities. So the project should also be able to demonstrate that it's doing this and has done this when it is reviewed. It will be useful to include gender indicators and targets in your log frame or logical framework, which we'll talk about more in a moment. And it would be good that the log frame reflects gender-related elements. Generating sex disaggregated data that reflects the impacts of mercury pollution is a good idea. Projects aimed at evaluating impacts of and exposures to mercury should include plans to evaluate the gender differentiated nature of impacts and exposures. Planning and organizing awareness raising activities that educate relevant stakeholders and the general public on the gender differentiated and socially determined impacts of mercury management is a good idea. Such activities may include producing information materials and media that contain gender-specific information and ensuring that in-person activities are held at times that both men and women are able to attend. Promoting multi-stakeholder approaches to ensuring effective participation of different groups, including women, in policy development and decision-making is a very important thing to look at. Creating terms of reference for project staff that ensure equal opportunity for women and men, and where applicable require skills and expertise in gender is a very good idea. Some projects have even included a specific gender focal point in their project team. And then finally, monitoring the benefits and participation and feedback among women and men during project activities and incorporating remedial action that promotes gender equality as appropriate is a good idea. So I hope that's not too much information, but the right amount for you to get started on thinking about that. And then now I want to just move on to environmental and social safeguards. So in addition to screening for gender aspects of your projects, applications must indicate which sustainable development goals the project will contribute to. And in addition, the Secretariat will review applications to flag any potential adverse impacts from a safeguards perspective. And we would provide any relevant feedback in that regard during the technical review phase. In February of 2020, UNEP adopted a revised environmental and social sustainability framework, which would guide our review of applications in that regard. The ESSF follows the following guiding principles. First, leave no one behind. Second, human rights and gender equality and women's empowerment. Third, sustainability and resilience. And fourth, accountability. And you can see the areas of specific focus of the environmental and social safeguards framework there on your screen. It's important to note also that stakeholder engagement is an essential part of implementing safeguards. So that's one of the many reasons why we look very carefully at stakeholder engagement when reviewing and appraising project applications. Monitoring and corrective action would be implemented during the life of a project to address any such impacts as they might arise. And we would look very carefully at project reporting to see if there's any such risks, but really it's up to the project management team in country to ensure that these that any adverse impacts are being addressed. And for projects that have particularly useful approaches from a safeguards perspective, we would seek to publicize that. So now I've talked for a very long time. I apologize for that, but I would like to now turn to Irene to look at the project application elaboration process. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Marian. Perfect. Let's move on. We will now look at how the project application can be elaborated using the application guidelines. And I would just like to give you a brief overview, and then we will move to look at the forms more closely. So for your submission to be complete, you will have to submit three application forms that are available on the website. The link has been added to the slide, but it's also in the chat. So you can find it there, and you can also find it on the website under the 4th round of applications tab. The application forms have been made available in English only because this is the working language of the governing board of the SIP. So you will have to submit the 3 forms for your applications to be considered completed by the 31st of July, as we said earlier. So I will now ask to my colleague Shariful to show the forms. So we will start with Form A. This is called the project application. Then there will be a Form B. Will be an Excel spreadsheet, and it's the project budget, and a Form C, that is the letter of transmittal. But the one you see now on the screen is the project application. So I would like to scroll down with you and highlight a few sections of this form. Thank you very much, Shariful. So you will see that this form starts with the project summary. And here, the first thing you will have to do will be to provide the information about the applicant government and the applicant government institution. So the applicant government official is a person in the applicant government. And you will have to provide the details about the title of this person, the department, and the contact details for us to be able to contact this person regarding the application. Then moving down, you will have to provide the project title, of course, budget. You will have to indicate the duration that your project would have. The budget is the budget that you would request from the SIP. To fund your project. And as Marian mentioned earlier, the maximum budget that can be requested from the SIP is $250,000 US. Then you will have to indicate the country status. So when your country ratified the convention, of course, as we mentioned earlier, and I see that there are some questions in the chat regarding this, only parties to the Minamata Convention can submit applications to the SIP. And only governments can submit applications. Then institutes like research institutes, academia, and non-governmental organizations, intergovernmental organizations can be indicated in the project application as partners, but governments have to take the lead in the application and be the ones to submit the application itself. Then in the application form, you will have to indicate the convention articles that are addressed by the project. So which obligations under the convention are going to be addressed and implemented by the project itself, then a project summary, and where we will ask you to provide some high-level summary of the project, and this will be used by the Secretariat for communication purposes. Moving on quite quickly, of course, all this information on how to complete this form is available in Chapter 4 of the application guidelines. So I really suggest you to use the guidelines to prepare your application. You will see that we will ask you to provide a rationale for the project, indicate if there are previous projects implemented by your country, for example, a national action plan or a Minamata initial assessment. These are enabling activities funded by the GEF. So if your country has already undertaken those, please provide all this information. Then expected results, so what your project aims to achieve. Moving down, the project management, so you will have to explain how the project will be managed and how the project partners, if you will have any project partners involved, will be included. Yes, there's a more specific and detailed section on project partners. And as I said, it is very important that the project is implemented by the applicant. And under the SIP, there is no provision for implementation agencies. And if your government wants to work closely with a Basel or Stockholm regional centers, non-governmental institutions, governmental institutions, research institutes, etc., or also UN agencies, these would have to be listed in this section as project partners. And the responsibility for the project and for its implementation remains with the government entity that will submit the application. So moving down, there's a section on the budget. And I will speak more about that later, but remember this section 2.5 is on budget and it's in Form A. Moving down, project considerations, you will have to provide an explanation, a narrative explanation of the impact, more information on the sustainability of your project, how the project will be, the results and also the impact of the project will be ensured in the long term, even after the project is closed. National ownership, because as I said, we don't work through implementing agencies, so it will be important that your project, that your government is responsible for the project. Moving down, Shariful, thank you very much. There's a specific section on gender, and Marian has spoken more about gender earlier, so all the information about how your project addresses gender considerations will have to be detailed here. And information on how your project implements the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the 2030 Agenda is also requested in this form. Moving down. Here, we will request you to provide some information on whether your government plans to also make a contribution to this project under the specific international program under the SIP. A government contribution is not mandatory, is not required, but still your government may decide to contribute in kind or funding to the project, and this will have to be detailed in this section of the form. Then we will ask you to provide information on other projects that may have been funded previously in your country from the GEF, from the special program. And of course, here you can indicate anything about the national action plans, Minamata initial assessments, other GEF projects, special program projects, etc. Moving down in the form, you will see that there's a specific section on monitoring, reporting, evaluation, and audit. This is very important, so I will spend a bit more time talking about this. And it is very important to understand the differences between monitoring, reporting, evaluation, and audit. So for monitoring and reporting, let's start with that part. So the monitoring of the project implementations refer to the routine collection and analysis of information about the project. And this is important to track the process, the progress in the implementation, and to check the compliance with the agreed logical framework, and to make informed decisions for the management of the project. So the monitoring activities will have to build on the agreed logical framework. We will show you what the logical framework is in just a minute, and with the work plan. And you will have to allocate resources, human resources, and if needed, financial resources for this process of monitoring from the start already in your project application. And it is important to mention that the regular monitoring, is the responsibility of the project manager and forms the basic of periodic reporting. The Secretariat will be requesting you to submit project reports twice a year, in June and December normally. So it is very important that this process is taken into account. And the reporting templates will be also provided by the Secretariat and will be part of the legal agreement to be signed when the project is approved. Evaluation is different from monitoring. And here there are two different scenarios. So for projects that will have funding from the SIP of 150,000 US dollars or less, the recipient government will be required to arrange for what we call the terminal review. And this is what you see also in the form. Terminal review is for projects up to 150,000 US dollars. And this is a mandatory step, and it falls under the responsibility of the government, and can be done internally or externally. Now, the application guidelines provide more information on the terminal review, but now it makes sense only to highlight that funding will need to be set aside for this process from the onset, already in the project applications, and it will be part of the project budget or can be an in-kind government contribution. And the amount budgeted for the terminal review may be around $2,000, but it should not exceed $4,000. And we have prepared guidelines for conducting a SIP terminal review, which should be considered and followed in the preparation of the terminal review. And of course, these guidelines will be shared with you if that is the case for your project. So don't worry. Now, the second scenario is the terminal evaluation. And this is a process meant for the projects that will have a budget above 150,000. Again, it is mandatory and will be initiated and conducted by the Secretariat, who will be hiring an external consultant, independent consultant, to do the terminal evaluation according to the criteria identified by the UNEP Evaluation Office. And we will manage the process for the terminal evaluations, and this will be funded by the Secretariat from the specific trust fund. So from the fund that contains the contributions for the SIP. And again, the terminal evaluation will be a process that will be conducted after the project ends. So when all the technical activities are completed and the final reporting is submitted. So moving on to the audit arrangements, this is also quite important. All the information again is in the guidelines, but maybe it's important to mention here that the applicant government is responsible for the financial management and audit of the project. And annually, within 6 months of the end of its fiscal year, the applicant government will be requested to submit a copy of its consolidated audited financial statements issued by an independent audit authority, and that will need to clearly identify the SIP funding. An alternative to the consolidated audited financial statements will be for the applicant government to submit an annual audit of the projects, and these annual audits can be budgeted as an activity of the project. So the audit arrangement should be already included as activities of the project. In addition to this, the applicant government will be responsible for conducting a final audit of the project after the project ends. And this will be, again, a process, a report issued by an independent audit authority following the completion of the technical activities. And the audit report will have to be submitted and is normally submitted together with the final narrative and expenditure reports of the project. And we request, it is requested in the guidelines that the total budget for the project audit arrangements does not exceed 5,000 US dollars. So maybe let's now move to another form, Form B, which is in the form of an Excel spreadsheet. So for Form A, I believe all the more important sections have been covered. And of course, you can refer to Chapter 4 of the application guidelines. And what you see in front of you now is the Form B, which is a project budget. It is composed of 4 tabs. So you can see the first tab that is now displayed on the screen is about the budget, the total budget for the project, and it includes the specific trust fund budget. It's the blue line at the top of this table. And that is the SIP budget that is requested by the government. But it also includes the applicant government contribution, if applicable, because as I said earlier, it is not mandatory. But if the government would like to provide more funding to the project, it should also be indicated here. So you will have the total project budget displayed at the bottom of this table. In the second tab, this will be very important for you to complete it very well, because it's kind of the foundation of your own project. And as we said earlier, the SIP project budget is an activity-based budget. So you will have to identify, as Marian explained, the outputs and the specific activities under each and every output of your project. And for each activity, you will see them numbered 1.1, etc. You will have to indicate the specific budget that will be allocated for the completion of that activity. And SIP projects envisage 4 categories of expenditures: for staff, for contractual services, for equipment, and for travel. So for each and every activity, you will have to indicate the budget allocated under each category. And with this table, you will have a full overview of the budget that will be allocated for the completion of the project. Again, all the instructions for completing it are on the application guidelines. The third tab, which is called Table 5, is about the applicant government contribution. And again, it's divided by output. And the fourth tab on class explanation will be explained in more details by Marian later on in this presentation, but just to give you an overview that what Marian will be explaining about the budget categories can also be found in tab 4 of Form B. So now let's move to Form C very quickly. Again, Marian will speak more about this later, but it's just to give you an overview of how the form looks like. As we said, by 31st of July, you will have to submit 3 forms, A, B, and C. And the C form will have to include 3 signatures. One from the applicant government official, the second one from the national focal point to the Minamata Convention of your country, and the third one by the JEF operational focal point. And Marian will speak more about that later, but I will stop here with displaying the form. And I would now like to move to the next slide. So now finally, we will explain you what a logical framework is. We have been mentioning it many times already during this presentation. So you will hear a lot about the logical framework or the log frame, which is the same. And it is really the structure of your project will be contained in this document, and it will be used throughout the project implementation for you to know to track progress in the implementation and also to report back to the Secretariat. So the logical framework is contained in Form A that we have provided to you. And it describes the project components and explain the details on how the project will operate and will affect the change intended. And you can see it in this slide. It's just an example. And as I said, the logical framework will be a roadmap for the implementation and a tool for evaluating and monitoring the progress. And once the impact and the outcome of the projects are determined, you will have to elaborate on the various outputs and associated activities, as Marian explained. And you will have to do this in this form. Outputs, as Marian mentioned earlier, you can see here an example of output 1 are tangible goods or services that the project produces or delivers. And in this example, the output is the development of a national Mercury information system. And how will you know that you are making progress in achieving this output that you have outlined under output 1? For that, you have the indicators and the means of verification. So for the indicators is a unit of measurement that helps assess the progress towards the achievement of the output. And it is very important that you know and that you indicate in the logical framework the baseline, which is basically what the situation is when the project starts. You can see here the baseline in the example is normally 0. But it could not be 0, it could be another number. It depends on your specific project. And it is also important that you indicate the target, so where you would like to be when the project ends. And this is the goal or target you can see in the slide. And the means of verifications are indications that help us determine if the indicator and consequently the output has been achieved or not. And you will have to indicate those in that specific section of your logical framework. For example, here you will have the terms of reference for the technical working group. For example, if your output is about the National Mercury Information System, then one of your activities will be the technical working group with relevant stakeholders formed. And the indicator will be the number of stakeholders participating in the technical working group. The baseline, of course, the starting point will be 0 and the target will be 15. And the means of verification will be the terms of reference for the technical working group. And the means of verifications are normally documents that you will have to share with the Secretariat together with your reports, with your narrative and financial reports when you report back to the Secretariat twice a year. As I mentioned, that the activities are actions to be completed in order to achieve the output. And these are basically practical actions like conducting the workshop or forming a technical working group or a steering committee, etc. Very importantly on this slide, I also want to point your attention to the milestones. This is the time by which you expect to complete the activity, and you will have to indicate the month and the year of when you plan to complete that activity. As we said, SIP projects can have a maximum duration of 36 months, 3 years. So you can see here that you will have to indicate whether it's year 1, 2, or 3. Moving on to the work plan. In the next slide, thank you, Sharifu. So once you have completed the logical framework, it needs to be reflected in what is called the work plan. And this is also contained in Form A. And all the outputs and activities that you have identified in the logical framework will have to be repeated in the work plan, showing the time frame in which the work will be done. And this will be by quarter. You don't need to specify the actual months. And you will have to mark with a color the quarter, the relevant quarter. And the months, of course, will be counted from the beginning of the project, because at this stage, you don't know when the start date will be when you prepare your presentation, when you prepare your application, sorry. And if the project is approved by the governing board, we will begin the process of revising the project documents if necessary, and negotiating and completing and signing the legal agreement for the transfer of funds, and this can take some time. So we keep these months without giving an indication of the actual date. Moving on to the next slide. I know it can be quite confusing, so let me explain what this slide is about. Okay, so on the left-hand side of the slide, you see again how the activities from the log frame are translated and reflected into the project work plan. And you color the quarter when you expect to complete the activities. Once you have done that, you have to complete the SIP project budget. And this, as I mentioned earlier, is in Form B, the Excel file. And of course, all the outputs will have to be broken down into activities, and each activity has to be reflected also in the budget table. And one important thing to mention here regarding the budget is that, as I mentioned, you can indicate how much funding you want to allocate to the 4 specific categories, and you will have the total budget at the bottom of the slide. And then you will have to complete section 2.5 of application form A, which, if you remember, I show you when we considered form A. You will have to complete that that small table, which is displayed here in the bottom right corner. And this should be consistent with the project budget section in the Form B. Moving on to the next slide. This slide is to give you a better view of the budget table as contained in the Form B, second tab. And well, it can be misleading because in this specific example, there is only budget allocated for contractual services, but it would normally look in a normal budget table, you will see also some budget allocated to staff and perhaps to equipment and to travel, and the subtotal for the output will show you the total budget allocated for that specific output. And with that, I really would like to encourage you to consider the application guidelines, where all this information is contained and explained in more details. And I will turn back to Marian for the next part of the presentation. Also, we have very few slides, so don't worry.
Yes, we are rapidly approaching the very end of our presentation, but we wanted to go into a little bit more detail about budget categories. Because even I find these confusing still after managing this program for a few years. And we know that it can be confusing for our applicants as well. So when developing the budget, it's important to understand what kind of activities can be funded by the specific trust fund budget, and what categories cannot be funded by the SIP. So budget categories are divided into 4 broad categories in the SIP. Some UNEP programs have different, more detailed budget categories, but we have only 4. And these are staff and other personnel costs, contractual services, equipment, and travel. So for specialized and technical equipment, which is needed for your project, there is a budget cap. It is set at 10%. However, up to 25% of your full budget could be considered for equipment by the governing board in exceptional cases, but we would need to have the justification for that attached as an annex to your application. Now, the output on monitoring, review, and evaluation and audit should not exceed 15,000 US dollars. And please be sure to include that output as the last output in your log frame and your work plan and budget. Now, so those are the things that can be funded, not in great detail, but I've given you some examples. Now I want to talk about what cannot be funded by the SIP, the Specific Trust Fund. And as you can see on this slide, the SIP cannot fund recurrent or running institutional costs, including the rental of office space, office equipment and furniture, vehicles, fuel, electricity, etc., things like that. The SIP cannot fund the wages, the salaries of civil servants. We also cannot fund hospitality costs, which, for example, are costs in connection with receptions given to participants in workshops or seminars related to the project. We cannot fund those hospitality costs. Of course, we cannot fund costs that are not directly related to the project. And we also can't fund costs that are disproportionate to the budget. So those are kind of some common sense items. So it's expected that any such costs would be covered by the applicant government or another in-kind donor. In addition, since we do not have a category for operating expenses, things like bank fees or costs that are a result of currency fluctuations, these are costs that are not covered by the SIP budget and they are costs that have to be borne by the applicant government. So I hope that makes sense, and we're always happy to answer questions about these types of things. Now, in the next slide, I want to look again at Form C, which Irene already showed to you, but a couple of important reminders. This is the letter of transmittal with your application. So as we said, it must be signed by these three entities. First is the applicant government official. So this is the official who has the authority of the government to enter into an arrangement to execute this project. So that's up to you as to who that would be. You, meaning the party. And this should be the person whose contact details were provided in section 1 of Form A. And then the second signature is the national focal point of the convention. And the third signature is from the JEF operational focal point in your country or your JEF constituency. So please be sure to allocate sufficient time to obtain these signatures well before the application deadline at the end of July of this year, because you have to include this in your fully submitted project application. And you're requested to email the signed form in PDF format to the Secretariat for the application to be considered complete. And please do not modify the format of this form. Modified forms can't be accepted. I hope that's clear. And now I think we just want to move on to finalizing your project application. And once you've completed forms A, B, and C, we recommend that you make sure that you've provided all the information as highlighted in the completeness checklist. This is in section 2.1 of Form A. And please make sure the contact details are correct, since they will be our official means of communicating with you on the results of the both our technical review and our invitation to resubmit based on our technical review comments, but also when it goes further down the road and goes before the governing board, and you'll want to be notified of the results of the governing board's decision-making process. So the information on related projects is also really important, because that section shows how the project has built on other related projects, previous efforts under the convention, and also if it's being executed in a synergistic way with other ongoing projects. So please do remember to fill out the related projects section. And note that you're requested to send Form A in both PDF and Word, Form B in Excel, and Form C in PDF, and if possible, also in Word, maybe the unsigned version. Please do not mail these to us. All this can be submitted electronically. And once the Secretariat receives the application forms, we will send you an email acknowledging receipt. And really important, if for any reason you do not receive an acknowledgement email from us within 1 week, please do contact the Secretariat at our mailbox at MEA-Minamata-Secretariat@UN.org. And that way we will know we're all on the same page, that your application hasn't landed in some junk email box or somehow been lost in cyberspace. These things do happen, and we want to be sure that we've received everything you've submitted. So now we are at the end of our slides. I'm sure you're quite thankful of that. And we'd like to open the floor for questions or any discussion or suggestions to us. And again, feel free to put your questions or comments in the chat. But at this stage, you can also raise your hand and request the floor. So we will just take some time here to monitor both the chat and the potentially any hands raised. So we do have a question in the chat, which says, hold on, I'm trying to get to it. Okay. Is this a direct access, or should we proceed via any other international accredited organization? This is an excellent question. And really, this is something that distinguishes the SIP from, for example, a JEF project, where an application would come through a JEF agency. The SIP is not like that. We do not have implementing organizations, implementing agencies. We do expect the partner, the party applicant government, to submit the application. Often there are implementing partners. So I distinguish an implementing agency here from an implementing partner. Oftentimes there are organizations, including even research institutes, Basel and Stockholm Convention regional centers, and others who play a key role in the implementation of the project. And we would hope that you would identify such partners in the application itself, identify those well in advance, so that if your project is agreed to by the SIP governing board, you will have already identified those partners, and we can quickly proceed to craft the legal agreement in the appropriate way. But the short answer is no implementing agencies. I hope that's clear. And I think we've so far addressed all the other questions. And if anything that we already answered in the chat was not sufficiently clear, please do raise your hand or put a follow-up in the chat. We still have plenty of time to answer. And I'll just pause here for a moment to see if there are more questions. I do not see any hands raised. Anything else in the chat? It's always good to save a little bit of time in our busy days. You all are very, very busy doing your implementation, so it will be okay if we end early, but I don't want to cut off any important questions. Colleagues, you'll let me know if there's anything else in the chat, but I think there is not. So again, feel free to contact us at any point, either myself, Irene Shariful directly, or of course through the Secretariat mailbox. That is the most efficient way to reach us because it's always monitored. So that's MEA-Minamata Secretariat @un.org, or contact any of us at any time. So with that, I'd like to close this webinar. I'd like to thank you very, very much for your interest in the SIP and in your interest in full implementation of the convention. And we're at your service should you have any suggestions for us or any further questions. Have a wonderful day and evening. Thank you.
Bye.